Hi. Way back in the 1930s, the Hammond Organ Company were faced with a very big problem, which was that their organs did not sound like people expected organs to sound. That when you took it home and played it in your house, it sounded dry and small. It didn't sound huge and beautiful like organs sounded, like you were used to hearing. And so very, very clever people at the Hammond Organ Company adapted work from Bell Laboratories and used springs, hanging springs, in order to simulate the sound of a hall. By playing the sound out of one end of the spring and picking it up at the other end, you created this kind of beautiful reverberant sound, which wasn't really the sound of a hall. It doesn't sound like a hall. It sounds like a hanging spring with sounds played through it, which just sounds beautiful and lush. And our ears kind of accept it. And so spring reverb was developed and led to small little tanks with straight springs, which were small enough for the Fender company to stick into their amplifiers. And more importantly for us, for synthesizers, which were small little wooden boxes, to have spring reverb tanks in them. This is all the more essential with a synth, because if you think about it, it's a kind of uniquely 20th century problem. Synth manufacturers were creating devices with direct outs that sounded dry, super dry, with not even the slightest hint of ambience, nothing at all, completely dry sounds, completely divorced from a physical space. So spring reverb became a beautiful finisher for the sound of a synthesizer, and there were some truly legendary synthesizers which had spring reverb in them. The EMS Synthy A, the EMS VCS3, the ARP 2600 had spring reverbs inside them. If you listen to Raymond Scott's electronic music, and you should, you hear spring reverbs all over them. It's innately tied with the history of electronic music. And if it's good enough for Peter Zinoviev, Alan R. Perlman, and Raymond Scott, it's good enough for me. So today, let's play with the A199. This is dope for spring reverb, and it's an awesome one because it's incredibly affordable. For under around £100, you get the spring reverb module and you get the spring tank. This is a 3-coil Belton tank. Belton. You can see the 3 little springs there, and you can see the driver and pickups. One problem with the tanks is that they're incredibly susceptible to electrical interference, so the placement of the tank can make a huge difference. You end up hearing this kind of buzz if you have it in the wrong place. Try and keep it away from your power supply. Try and keep it away from digital modules as well. I've had to experiment an enormous amount to try and get acceptable line noise with this. There's still a tiny, tiny little bit of electrical hum, but not so much that you notice in the context of a mix. Anyway, what's cool is that this tank is incredibly small. You might think it doesn't sound very dense and lush, but it does. You can actually swap out the tanks, and I know that there's some information online, folks who've tried to find compatible tanks that work with the module. I'm not convinced about the need to do that. You can get longer reverb tails if you use bigger tanks, but it kind of sounds pretty damn good if you ask me. So I just stuck with the stock tank. All right, let's play. So, synth, totally dry. Now, the level is slightly up, which is putting sound into the tank, and if I increase the mix, it just sounds badass. You know that sound, even if you didn't know it was a spring reverb, you've heard it before. There's a spring reverb in the Space Echo as well. Here we have a feedback and emphasis control. The innate sound of the spring reverb is kind of dark. It's not a digital reverb, obviously. It doesn't preserve perfectly the input signal. So by increasing the emphasis, there is a big wide bell curve at 2K. You can hear it bring some brightness in, bring some noise with it. But it's useful to brighten the dark sound of the verb. Above it, we have a feedback control. And this is where stuff gets really cool, because the feedback control is literally that. The spring reverb can feed itself back in on itself and create kind of a runaway tone, very much like using delay, you know, on the Space Echo, using lots and lots of delay and creating that awesome swooping distorted sound. You can do that on a reverb too. Whoa. Cool. We do have two sockets here, reverb out and external feedback in. What these are going to let us do is patch things into that feedback path, and you can do some really cool things here. Firstly though, I want to take advantage of the fact that I have an extremely expensive multi-track device right next to me, and that is simply to multi-track a mono effect. I only have one of these spring reverbs. I'd love two, but then I would have to buy two. So let's double track this and hear what this thing sounds like in stereo. And we're literally just going to record this. Let that little part roll around a few times while I record it into my DAW. And then just take the pieces, cut them up, offset them so that you're getting different parts of the performance. So you're not laying the same part on top of each other, and then spread the sides, create a stereo thing, and it will sound like this. Pretty sweet. Of course, that whole principle extends to all of modular synthesis. Multi-tracking lots of mono instruments is kind of the thing to do. But don't be discouraged by the fact it's mono. Just multi-track it. Alright. Let's try it on a whole mix. Adds a kind of beautiful, lush ambience. Dry. Start to distort into the spring at a high level. So, that's all well and good, and it sounds beautiful on just a single element with dry drums as well. I'm just running it through the mix so you can kind of hear it. Let's now get the feedback path going. Okay, so now I have an IntelliGel Chorgasmatron, which is just a dual MS-20 style filter patched into the feedback path, and I literally just have the reverb out going into the input of the Chorgasmatron, and I have the output of the Chorgasmatron going into the external feedback in. So it's literally going out of the filter, coming back in, but obviously it's getting looped around every time. So when we turn up the feedback, the filter will filter the feedback, and I have high pass and band pass filter in series here. And as I adjust the filter, there is, by the way, nothing coming in we get these wonderful kind of add N to X style feedbacks. That's the filter resonating itself, which is obviously a pretty sound to tickle the feedback path with. And the springs start to resonate and vibrate. So, wow. Make these kind of dark, rad tones. More emphasis. Sounds like it could just be part of a drawn, like, cello bow. Rad. Here I have the offset from a maths going in to control both sides of the filter at the same time, so I can use just one knob to control both sets of the filter, which makes it really easy. What you're basically doing is sweeping both sides of the both filters at the same time. So I basically have a bandpass here, and I can sort of pick out and then try and tease out these different tones. Which have these really beautiful, dark, moody characteristics. Saying this is the finished article as such, but this stuff is amazing to chuck into a sampler, make tones out of this, make big long crazy synth tones by like looping little sections of this in your sampler. Distorts really easily, but man, it sounds pretty rad, some of those little bits. Cool. Having our spring reverb tank outside of the case here is born out of necessity in order to reduce the electrical noise that this thing picks up. But of course, with the springs exposed, nothing stops you poking them yourself and using the bare exposed springs as a kind of freakish noise generator. You can scrape these things. And all this sounds fantastic if you have some delay. Take a screwdriver. Ping me, bad boy. That is how the lasers are made in Star Wars. Samplers at the ready, guys and girls. Cool. What if we put our drums back in? Let's turn down that delay. I'm pinching two of the springs so that you're only hearing one of them. I can feel this through my finger. You can actually feel the drums playing, which is kind of cool. But it gives it a more like zingy. It's just one of the springs, not all three. So you lose the denseness. Cool. I don't know if I'm dexterous enough to let 2 go. Peace.